Rust to Green is an initiative that we've embarked on through Cornell in partnership with Utica to help imagine how the city could shape its future around green initiatives and recover or reinvent itself from its narrative that basically has created it over, the last 100 years. So in its post-Rust Belt identity, how can we reimagine what kind of city it could be? Does it need to become smaller? Does it need to readapt itself to new infrastructure like green infrastructure, which would replace some of the more conventional infrastructure that at this point is deteriorated and perhaps in need of revitalization and rehabilitation? Things like the stormwater system, the utility infrastructure like roads and street networks that may be able to be transformed around new concepts of green design, which would obviously save money, reconstitute ecological habitat, redistribute open space within the city, create new identity to the city itself, and create a more healthy and habitable city environment that people want to live in and want to invest in.
This attitude, that's sort of a pessimistic attitude, is not only unique to Utica. It's of every city that has, that has gone through a transition and that doesn't quite know where it wants to be yet. But one of the things I noticed in my work, I worked primarily in California before this and in Italy, it's that through design we get people excited about possibilities or visions for the future through, focusing on the assets, the environmental assets that already exist, whether it's streets, the urban landscape, but also like green, landscapes within the city, vacant lots that maybe turn into something that's sort of, productive, again, like community gardens. I think through design, through this, sort of idea that, we start from something that's there and then we envision a future out of it, through it. So that's how you gather, how you bring people together of different opinions and different views.
Green means environmentally friendly. It also means trying to look at your assets. So looking what you have in terms of your strengths and assets and building your identity around those. So one of the whole ideas is to try to turn ourselves on the city itself, not us, but to turn the city inward and to look at itself. What are its assets? What are its attributes? What can it build its identity around? Now, some of those are going to be physical attributes. Other of those might be things that have to do with geography and location. For example, its proximity to a local food system, to distribution networks, to new economies that may be shaped by global initiatives like the green economy. So it's really about how do we reshape the identity of a city that already has a strong heritage and has many assets in place. How do you build the sort of new identity that takes the best of the past, reconfigures that or relayers it with the best new ideas, and constitutes a new identity out of that? So it's not really a new identity, I suppose that's the wrong way to say it, but it's an identity that's shaped out of the best traditions of the past with the new concepts for the future. And there's plenty to build on here in Utica, because it is a city that has a strong history, cultural and social history. It has a lot of the assets of a livable place and city access to green space, recreation, clean air, situated in a larger region, which still has some extent agriculture, has access to road networks, it has access to train and transportation networks. It's within easy distance of major airport, in the Syracuse area. It's not far from Albany and New York, so it can be tied to a larger system. And then obviously it's gone through a lot of changes too, where it's got new populations arriving here, new populations of immigrants. How do we re-educate, or how do we educate the new city community to really feel that they belong here and can find jobs and establish families and live in the best possible place and have access to the best cultural resources, the best clean air, healthy lifestyle that a city could offer. The idea is that there's plenty to build on here, and it's really a matter of turning the imagination and creativity and economic agendas and ideas on the city itself. See what we can do.
This is our first workshop that we've run for Rust to Green. We've had 34 students, and I'd say the level of enthusiasm is very high. I've definitely noticed since my time at Cornell, I've been at Cornell for about 10 years since I was a graduate student in 2000. I've seen a real increase in the kind of socially motivated activity by students. They're not concerned anymore with a nice picture to put in their portfolio. They're more concerned with making real positive change in communities. So we've seen that expand, definitely. And I think the students are really excited to be a part and contribute to change in Utica and Binghamton. We have 34 students from city and regional planning, natural resources, industrial labor relations, and agricultural economics. And they're working with us within the workshop to generate project ideas for Utica. So we have one group that's working on the Monday Nights series. We have another group that's working on our Rester Green presentations, what we will eventually present to the community in order to talk about what the project's about. We also have students working on mapping for the city. So we're generating a mapping database using GIS and Google Earth and other programs that will hopefully become a set of retrievable maps that we can build upon for the next 4 or 5 years. I think it's amazingly rewarding, and hopefully, they want it to be as real as possible, so they would like to have more involvement with a wider community. I think we'll grow that in the future with this project. But yeah, they like it real world. Our expectations are to come out with products that we can use to carry on with Rester Green. Some of the products that we produce will be usable right now, and others will be continually built upon for the next several years.
Part of this process is also to see what model would fit best a city of this size in this kind of regional context. And not all solutions might be applicable to Utica, but that's the idea, that we learn from other cases. We'll have the students work on case studies and look at what other cities, in particular in similar situations, may have done, and then see how applicable they are to this context. The Hatch grant, it's a grant from the Department of Agriculture. It's a grant that's given for research on agriculture or on sort of this kind of productive type of landscapes. This is one of the few times that the grant has been given to somebody who's interested in sort of community development as well as urban design. So it was a little bit of a new thing for the Hatch and for Cornell Extension, but we were glad to actually receive this grant. So we started thinking about it a couple of years ago in the summer. We got together and we bumped into this article by the Brookings Institute, which is an organization in Washington that listed Utica as one of the 60 cities in the U.S. that has the most promise in terms of re-envisioning itself and becoming something different based on the existing infrastructure. What we mean by infrastructure, we mean sort of the buildings, the streets, but also the infrastructure, the community infrastructure. The communities, the strong communities that already exist, as well as the cultural infrastructure, universities, colleges, theaters. Based on all of these sort of assets, we saw the possibility to actually promote a different type of change that would be sustainable, resilient over time. And we saw the possibility here in upstate New York. And we wanted to kind of change and shift the discourse from a discourse of sort of depression or of lack of opportunities to one that shifts us towards the fact that there are opportunities that are already existing that we need to sort of harvest and we need to build upon.
So we're really here to help catalyze that. We're not here to do it. We're help to shape and catalyze an initiative that's really coming from within. And what we've seen so far is that with here in Utica, and we're very much in the nascent stage. I keep saying that, the sort of birthing stage of this initiative, but what we see already is the amazing resources in the form of people and intellectual capital, knowledge resources. There's obviously also a strong tradition of philanthropy, but there's incredible city here that has all of the bones, if you may, of a healthy place. It's been built over the last 100 or so years, and that's here on which to build anew. With plans in place, there's basically an infrastructure of planning on which to build, which is wonderful. So that's a very exciting moment, I think, for the city. And I think that, this is really a sort of collision of the forces. Rester Green is not something that's going to usurp the master plan. It's obviously going to build on the master plan. And it's going to help motivate or move to the action phase. And you can see Rester Green as an action phase that's already coming from or growing from the master plan. So, master plan is the plan. It's the big idea. And then from that are distinct action steps that add up to creating a new identity. So Rust to Green, if we can help in that process to be one of the action steps, help to motivate the city to reimagine itself and reconstruct its future, conceive its future really, then that's why we're here.
One of the things that landscape architects have sort of rediscovered is the fact that landscapes are not just used for recreation, but they can be used, again, for productive uses. They can treat water, stormwater, so that the water doesn't go into the river. It can be treated on site. They can grow, biofuels, or they can grow material that can be transformed into energy. They can harvest, energy, wind and solar energy. And I think all of these things can be done on, even within the fabric of cities. It used to be that these things were done outside. Now the urban landscape can become productive again. And I think that's a great potential. So it's no longer a vacant site that doesn't give back, doesn't give anything to the community, that just requires the city to sort of input, money into it, but it's actually, it's a money-making entity as well. They can become, places for habitat, for bringing nature back into cities. A lot of people are moving to suburbs because they want to be close to nature. They want to be close to the trails. They want to see, birds and wildlife. Well, there's an opportunity to actually use some of these vacant lots that might not be well served by the existing infrastructure, or they might be too far away from the center so that they're not walkable and they require cars to, for people to use, to actually turn these into other types of assets. You can do urban agriculture, and that's what I think Detroit is doing. A lot of other cities are doing that, and I think it's a potential, it's a model that Utica may be applicable to Utica. I think Utica is already teaching a lot of other cities. For instance, the focus that's here on arts. One of the things that we noticed as a team coming into Utica compared to other communities in upstate New York was also that there's a pride here in being a city. You have a Stanley Theater. It's an amazing, facility. You have a focus on. You have a great museum. You have all this, like the ability to be a great city. You have the culture that is needed to create a city. Now you need to rebuild that infrastructure. That urban infrastructure. It may be different. It may be greener, and it may be less about the smog and less about, sort of manufacturing, and more about, tourism, and more about agriculture, more about community. So it's refocusing back to the community. So that's exciting. And we think of Utica as it could become a paradigm. And the other thing that we wanted to do with the grant was to pair up cities. For instance, Binghamton is going through a similar process. They're focused more on sort of, bringing industry in. But they can teach Utica something about that, and Utica can teach them how to be a good city with a lively sort of urban scene. And I think that's the idea of the grant, to pair up communities. So, and through this, sharing this dialogue, new ideas might emerge, and then also a new sense of a region, so that these cities are not seen as competing with one another, but they're one and the same. I'm very optimistic, and I think it's going to be, there's a revival, of the city. I see it as it's a city of diversity. It's going to be diverse. It's going to be diverse not only in the population, but also in the type of landscapes it's going to have. It's going to have the the downtown with the old with the historic architecture, but also modern new development, as well as green development. So I think of it as like becoming the next sort of the sustainable city that's going to set an example, and starting small and incrementally like sort of building up this new identity.